Well, hello, I'm Joe Spina, and welcome to the Joe Spina Show, where truth is our mission, rarely our realm, said as we see it, and frankly as well, bread and circuses, or let them eat cake. Let them eat cake is a quote that famously was attributed to Marie Antoinette, who was Queen of France during the French Revolution. As the story goes, the people were starving to death, they had no bread, and she is quoted as having responded by saying, let them eat cake. Evidently, they weren't happy about that. They preferred bread and circuses to cake, heads rolled, including Marie Antoinette's and a whole bunch of others. The French rebelled. Now let's take a look at what happened in Rome. Rome gave all types of free bread and fun stuff and games and circuses, and nevertheless it imploded. So maybe it's a good idea that we ought to take a peek at what happened in Rome and why it imploded, what happened in France and why it imploded, and what's happening here in the United States today and will we implode. So the similarities between our current government and that of Rome is fairly fascinating, particularly when it comes to bread and circuses, which is nothing more than a euphemism for the expanded welfare state, particularly that which is being proposed by President Biden, who wants to spend an additional $6 trillion on who knows what. So let's take a particular history. In the first 2 centuries AD, about 2,000 years ago, a little less, Rome faced a massive gulf between the rich and the poor. Sound familiar? The Roman Empire also, by that time, had reached its geographical limits. So too has the United States. We went from the Atlantic to the Pacific in 70 fast years. Our country was founded in 1783, and by 1853, with the purchase of what we call the Gadsden Purchase, which is a river valley, the Gila River, in southern Arizona. In effect, the United States had gone from Boston to San Fran in a lifetime. And anything in its way went by the way, whether we Native Americans, Buffalo, or whomever, or whatever. It was called manifest destiny. And there are a lot of people who look at it as a negative. But I don't see anybody want to give it back. And after that, of course, we expanded into with the Spanish-American War and the late 19th century, 1898, 1899. We acquired Puerto Rico. We acquired the Philippines, which we subsequently gave up after World War II. But we had reached our geographical limits, much as Rome has. Now, trying to defend that thins out your troops and takes treasure, costs you a lot of money. If you take a pay cut, 20 years of our involvement in the Middle East, which is several $1 trillion worth of wealth, not to count the human misery that's taken place both with the natives of that region and our own soldiers coming back without arms, legs, and completely dysfunctional. Sounds quite familiar to what happened to the Romans. In Rome, slaves acquired by conquest, they're the ones that built the roads and the bridges and the aqueducts, AKA known as infrastructure. You know why? Because they're the only ones that would take jobs were considered dirty jobs, like farming, mining, construction, etc. And these are jobs Americans don't seem to want to do today, unless you come from Central America or from Sicily, where my parents came from. And effectively, the so-called illegal alien of today is a new class of slave. They're the ones who will do the dirty jobs that are available to anybody, all Americans, but they don't want to fill them. They all want to drive around in BMWs and wearing ballet shoes and being hedge fund managers. A cheap labor replaced Roman citizens, as cheap labor did, and this is what importation with us open borders does. The Roman citizens became idle, unemployed, hungry, uh, namely homeless or the underclass, and they tended to fill the capital, Rome, which didn't bode well for the city of Rome because everybody vanished sooner or later, as is happening to our major cities. People are leaving New York City in droves. Same thing in San Fran, for the same reason why they left Rome. When the indigents moved in, those who could moved out, and the rest is history. Rome created quite a bit of what they call work or make work, part-time jobs, uh, subsidized housing, and doled out grain, which is effectively food stamps, similar to what we're doing today. You know, when people talk about, oh, we're going to invest in infrastructure and we're going to create jobs and the new green energy, I mean, that's exactly what they're talking about. They're talking about subsidized housing, you know, part-time jobs, government things, which produce absolutely zero wealth. So you can't support something unless you have wealth. And you can't create wealth or you can't spend unless you generate wealth. And I don't understand how folks who graduated with PhDs and master's degrees and all of our Ivy League institutions can't figure that one out. And then the government did another thing in Rome. They added holiday after holiday after holiday to such a point that nobody was working. They were always on holiday. They spent more time attending gladiator games, public executions, and chariot races, which also sounds familiar because we've replaced it with Netflix, the internet, TV, professional sports, NASCAR, and the Grammys. Now, all of this was lambasted at the time by the critics of that time, to which Romans did what they normally do. They exiled them all. Well, thankfully, they didn't execute them, but they did exile them, as they did Napoleon later on. In our country, what do? We put them in jail. I mean, we do FBI raids at 6 o'clock in the morning, and that's it. It's the same difference. So, let's repeat. History lets us know or gives us a glimpse into what's going to happen in the future should we follow that path. If you smoke 2 packs of cigarettes a day for 60 years, you can probably expect to have emphysema, maybe, or maybe lung cancer. You know, they're kind of related. So history lets you know what you ought to do and ought not to do. And apparently we don't have too many students of history doing very much thinking about what's happening. We have a lot of social justice warriors. We have a lot of people making apologies and coming up with constructs that make zero sense. For example, let's take a peek at private property. Well, a border, in effect, is a delineation of private property. No? You know, like, for example, Mexico and the United States are separated by this thing called a border. And as we are from Canada, and saying that this is my property, that's your property. You should know, you have a home, you live in a home. If you have a home, that's your private property. Does anybody have the right to come in, open your door, go into your refrigerator, and have whatever they want? Think about that. That's what open borders is all about. Now, understand this. Marxists don't believe in borders. They don't believe in private property. Everything is to be owned cooperatively, communally. That's what communism is all about. That's what socialism is all about. There's no such thing as private property. There's no such thing as personal ownership. And you better start getting that into your head, folks, because the way we're going right now, if you think it's going to get any better, you're out of your mind. You better wake up, because we're going by way. And I hate being pessimistic about this, and it breaks my heart because I have lovely grandchildren and now great-grandchildren who have to live in a world that I don't think is going to be in the best interest or in their best interest. I lived in a glorious period of time. I'm not trying to be reminiscent and nostalgic about how wonderful the past was. No. In the past, there were things that weren't all that great, and we are improving. But when it comes to this economic system, the simplicity of it is very simple. Those who work and are ambitious and save and frugal are going to do fine. Why should they have to be the ones to pick up the tab for folks who choose not to do any of the above? It's an insanity. You just can't turn around and everybody drinks from the same well, and before you know it, there's no water in the well, and we all suffer. And that's what we have to think about. You can't go around spending a whole bunch of, understand something. Government doesn't produce a damn thing, doesn't create any wealth. It in effect is confiscatory. It comes to you with guns, knives, and cannons and says, pay otherwise. Otherwise what? Otherwise you're in deep trouble. And they take your money and they decide to do with it what they feel like doing with it. You can't put up with that much longer. I mean, think about this. How many folks do you know that came from humble beginnings who all of a sudden spent a lifetime in public service, have 4 or 5 mansions and have millions of dollars, who have summer homes on the Cape at 15 million bucks a pop? I mean, give me a break. I mean, that doesn't add up. Think about it. We need some honorable people. We truly do. You know, in Rome, there was a guy named Cincinnatus. He had retired. He was an old general. He had retired to the farms. He didn't want any part of it anymore. Take it easy. But the barbarians were knocking on the door, and Rome was in trouble. And so they hearkened. Cincinnatus, help us, bail us out. And he was reluctantly said, okay, well, Rome and the Republic had this caveat that a dictator or dictatorship was to be installed in an emergency situation for a prescribed period of time to resolve a threat to the Republic. At the end of that period of time, the dictator packed it in, and that was the end of it. And Cincinnatus agreed to bail Rome out if he could, and he did. After he had defeated the barbarians or the threat to Rome, he put his sword down, he went back to the plow. He was an honorable man. I would like to see more folks like Cincinnatus who just go and do their job and put their swords down and go back to whatever they were doing thereafter. That's not the way it is. And we better think about that in real serious terms. So, my stream of consciousness as we go, let them eat cake, breads and circus, and the rest of it. Why don't you just leave people alone to their own devices? And guess what? Wealth will be created. And with wealth, we all benefit. You know, I think it's marvelous. I have no clue how to fool around with all these electronic devices today, which is what I think grandchildren are for, to help their old folks understand what's happening now. And a lot about what's happening now, and I don't want to sound terribly pessimistic, is really, really great. Improve upon it. I don't want to listen to this, systemic racism stuff, or I'm an old white guy, therefore I believe in white supremacy. I never thought of it that way, but apparently some people do. I keep thinking about this, and it troubles me that we ought to be a little more empathetic toward others and the plight of others. We don't necessarily have to. I mean, I'm not going to accept the fact that somebody loads up on fentanyl every other day and therefore is a victim, because I think somewhere along the line, we're responsible for our own actions. We do have free will, hopefully. I mean, I think we do. And we make choices. You make bad choices, you pay the penalty. You make good choices, you get the benefits. Sometimes life isn't fair. And we understand that too. But you can't have a government that's out there like the candy man telling everybody under the sun, I'm going to take care of you. We're all going to live in this wonderful, wonderful nirvana or something to that effect. Well, it's just not going to happen. We're individually different with different needs and different wants and different likes. And consequently, we have to factor that into the societal structure. Not everybody can be a nuclear physicist. Not everybody is good at math. Not everybody's a good, you can't put a guy like me, Joe Spino, who can barely hear, as an air traffic controller. Those planes be crashing into each other every other day. That's an insanity. There are things that you can't do by accidents of birth. This thing called equality doesn't mean the same. Equality is that we have the same soul, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness within the context of what our capacity is. That's the caveat. So, I always wanted to be the right fielder for the Boston Red Sox. Guess what? I never made it. And there's a simple reason why. I wasn't good enough. That's all. I didn't have the talent. Well, I didn't find a bridge to jump off, and I didn't buy some razor blades and say goodbye. It's a fact reality. I tried to find something I was half decent at that gave me a decent life. And I got to tell you something, the ride wasn't all that bad up to this point. So, enjoy your life. Don't get hung up on all this noise and nonsense that you've been hearing so much of. With my dear friend Avram Lapidus, we were talking about one of the great movies of all time, which we misnamed, by the way. It was called The Beautiful Life. Watch that. Watch stuff like that. True love, appreciation, sacrifice. These are all wonderful things, and we shouldn't frown upon them. To reinforce them, cherish them, teach them. Well, I've said my thing. That's my diatribe for the day. Like it or not, Joe Spina is now going to go down, get myself a cup of coffee, relax, kiss my dog, maybe take a nap.